You're with Kat Feeney on ABC Radio Brisbane and Queensland.
It's 1:15. If you love someone, then you share everything with them, don't you? Your hopes, your dreams, your fears, and your finances. A joint account is more than just a symbol that you're in a relationship, it's a commitment to it as well. And if you're starting afresh later in life, then sharing your finances honestly and openly is an important building block for the foundations of a successful and happy relationship. Or is it? Phil McGann is the Director of Claritude Financial Planning here in Brisbane. Phil, joint accounts with a loved one. What do you say, Phil? Is that the way to go?
It's a hard one. Individual circumstances really dictate it. It's a big issue for me for people later in life after you've been divorced and been maybe a bit burnt, those sorts of things. A lot more assets involved than when you're in your 20s. So trying to have a joint bank account with someone straight up in a new relationship, I don't know if that's a great idea. You may have joint bank account for minor things like food or utilities and things like that if you're cohabitating. But to sort of rush headlong into a joint bank account for everything, I think is a bit problematic.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you look at the most recent census data, males are more likely to divorce between the ages of 45 to 49, women between 40 and 44. With life expectancy running to the 80s, there's a pretty good chance that you would, post-divorce, maybe find someone else again. So are you seeing more of this in your financial planning practice?
It's a really big issue because what you tend to find is people in their late 40s, 50s are repartnering again after a divorce and it's hard to start again, not just on an emotional level, but on a financial level. If you've actually had a divorce, a split up, assets are separated, it's not good for either party really. And so you're starting again. So people are a little bit gun shy going forward and those things. But the bank account is one part of it, but it's other things that you need to be concerned about as well and make sure you take action on other major assets that you may have also.
Well, I'm thinking if you're, looking at that midlife age range, you're probably thinking property and super, Phil.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, looking at those individually on the property front, everyone should know that you can have two ways to own a property. You can have a joint tenancy, you can have a tenancy in common. A joint tenancy basically means that you own a property with your partner. In the event of the death of one of the partners, it automatically flows through to the other person. Ownership just moves over, which is all good. A tenancy in common is a bit different in that if you own 50% of a property with someone else, in the event of their death, the tenancy has to pass through their estate. Now, it may well be that you're the beneficiary of that, but it may mean that their adult children are the beneficiary of their portion of the property, which is problematic if you reside in that property and intend to into the future. How does that work? And that's where you need to get some estate planning advice and make sure that you are very au fait with what you're trying to achieve for both parties. Otherwise, you potentially could own a property half with your adult children, your late partner's adult children.
So it's sort of, let's do dinner, darling, and have an estate planner as well as part of the earlier phases of a relationship. It's a lot to consider, but it's high stakes, isn't it, I guess?
It is high stakes. You think of the value of property, even in Brisbane at the present time, it's a big asset for most people, maybe the largest asset they're going to have. And if half of that is owned by someone else who is not your beloved, but their adult children, that's very problematic.
Of course, it is just so complicated when it comes to relationships, isn't it? Because, if you think about it, you don't want to have emotion involved in financial decision making.
No, you
but
don't.
It's kind of, in some cases, hard to separate. You kind of just hope that love will prevail and people will do the right thing.
Maybe I've been doing this job long enough. I'm a bit cynical.
But I think this is interesting. Phil McGann on ABC Radio Brisbane and Gold Coast, by the way, if you've just joined in, we're talking about maybe some of the things to consider with regards to your finances if you're finding love a little later in life, maybe after divorce or just because that's the way things worked out.
True.
Now, superannuation, that's the other big asset that you might
It's a big asset now for a lot of people going forward because we've all had super for a while and younger people starting out in life now are going to have super for a lot longer than you and I, Kat. And so it may be their biggest asset in the future. People don't realise, or not realise as much as they should, that superannuation doesn't form part of your estate. And the reason for that is there's a superannuation trustee a super fund is literally just a trust with a trustee on top, and you need to inform that trustee what to do with your assets, your super fund, in the event of your death. So it automatically doesn't get covered by your will. You can actually pay it through into your estate or have beneficiaries noted there, but there's a form called a binding death nomination that you actually need to complete. It's a very important legal document that you need to complete with your super fund to tell the trustee what to do with your super in the event of your demise. So it's a lot of people don't realise that. They think, well, my super will just flow through to my partner or whatever. No, you need to tell them. And what tends to happen, and I've seen this often enough, when you look at people's superannuation, you look at their beneficiaries and it's their ex-partner because they had a divorce 2 or 3 years ago and they didn't change, but they thought they didn't. You
just assumed that.
They just assumed that I've changed my will, but your will doesn't cover your super. And if your super is your biggest asset, well, that's a problem. So, and the courts have sort of seen actions on these sorts of issues that the superannuation trustee pays it out to the ex-partner. So it's problematic. So it's something is an easy fix. And it's one of the things that you need to tick off when your relationship fails or you move on, divorce or whatever, that you go through property assets, superannuation assets, making sure mundane things like utility bills, whose name are they in? Mobile phone contracts, whose name are they in? Those sorts of things need to be ticked off. So you're in a very fragile emotional state, but you need to sort of not compound that by having financial issues down the track as well.
Boy, it's a lot to think about, isn't it? Being a grown-up is hard.
Oh, it's hard.
Phil
McGann. Adulting is hard.
Tell me about it. 20 minutes past 1, you're on ABC Radio Brisbane and Gold Coast. I'm Kat, and Phil McGann's here with Claritude Financial Planning. We're taking a look at how to think about arranging your finances if you find yourself in a relationship with someone a little later in life maybe. What do you need to do to protect the assets that you've worked hard for, that you've acquired over a few decades of time on this planet? How do you make sure that things are properly arranged? And, of course, the conversation that we are having is general in nature, so please do consider seeing your own financial advisor and receiving your own personalised advice. But just to come back to, I guess, the basic element, and that is the bank account, Phil. We've spoken about retaining personal bank accounts and having a shared account for bills. But what about other investments like a new mortgage with a partner?
Well, that's a bit different because you're both liable for the payment of that mortgage against, say, the new property that you may well buy. So you're going into that a bit more eyes wide open. It's not a case of you're bringing other assets in. This is a new asset that both of you have agreed to go through. The bank has approved a loan for a joint loan, so you're working it out on that sort of score there. So you're both liable for the payment of that debt. So that's different, and I'd sort of say that it's a bit different to sort of just a general savings account. If you do actually have a savings account joint with someone else, make sure both people have access to it. You know where the cards are, you know what the limits are, you know what people can actually do with it. Again, it's just trying to make sure you don't have any issues into the future. Look, it's a hard thing to bring up with someone, but, entering a relationship, it should be very open and trusting and all the cards on the table. You've got to think about these things, and I think that should lead to a more trusting side of things as well. But it's difficult because you're dealing with financial issues as well as emotional issues, and when you get the two together, it causes problems.
Especially if one of the parties or both doesn't have much confidence with regards to it, and that can make you feel a little stressed and vulnerable, can't it?
It can do, because some people are a bit wary about it, or they may not be as comfortable with financial affairs as someone else or their new partner is. It's hard. You've got to get the right sort of level. But I always find being very open and say, well, this is my background. You find it quite often that people's financial attitudes are impacted by their upbringing and what their parents were like with money and things like that. So when you're sort of forming new relationships, those sorts of conversations are a good way to gauge as well. And you can tell when you meet other people's families what things are like.
I love this. Yes. Love and Money with Phil McGann on ABC Radio Brisbane and Gold Coast. Bridget, you're on the Sunshine Coast. Hi, Bridget. What's been your experience?
This tenants in common that somebody was speaking about earlier,
yes.
I had a problem with I went into bought a property, and my partner was going to pay part of the deposit, and he ran out of money. But I put his name on the deeds of the house, and apparently he said at the time, because he'd been in real estate, we'll do it in tenants in common. So if anything happens to me, you will have the whole property in your name. There'll be no question. And then when the relationship broke up, he was able to change that to joint tenants. And I didn't know that, but it's against the law. So people who are thinking about, going into a property situation with somebody and they have tenants in common, they must realize that it can be changed without their permission.
Wow.
And that is something I didn't know until...
You and me both. You and me both, Bridget.
7 years it took, and then he hadn't put any money into the property. He lived in the house for about 4 years. And I was paying the mortgage and everything, and that's what happened. And I ended up, it cost me a lot of money to get it transferred, because when he died, and then his estate, he had 6 children, so they had 50% of my house, my home that I had purchased and paid for everything. So,
Bridget.
Beware.
Beware.
Exactly. When people are doing that, tenants in common is not worth the paper it's written on.
Bridget, I'm very glad you called. Thank you very much. Phil, your thoughts?
Look, it's a very difficult thing to sort of work through on a legal aspect. I mean, I won't give any input on the aspect of that, of tenancy and joint and all the rest of it, but it's really comes to the fore that you need to sort of go through it with a solicitor first up. You need to basically work through where you're at and what the situation is, because that's a really bad situation. When you think of it further as well, a lot of blended families these days, as people are repartnering in their 50s, next thing you know, they've got potentially children on both sides and children together. And how does that impact on their finances in the future, but also in the estate issues further on? Very fraught.
Yeah, it's
very
a lot
fraught.
to consider. It's a lot to consider, as you said. Openness, transparency, and appropriate professional advice goes a long way. Phil McGann, thank you.
No dramas.
Very much.
Thank you.
Phil McGann with you. He's the Director of Claritude Financial Planning. And a reminder again that this chat is general in nature, and if you are seeking financial advice, then you should speak to an appropriate professional in person. And you can also call Relationships Australia on 1300 364 277. That's Relationships Australia on 1300 364 277.
On your radio and online.
At home or on the road.
This is ABC Radio.